This is True Crime Out Loud.
I'm your host, B.
And I'm your host, Jen.
And this week's case was suggested by Teresa Cornell and takes place in Hamilton Township, Ohio. Hamilton Township is located in Lawrence County and is a small area with a population just below 2,000 people. It sits along the Ohio River, and this is a unique area because it's an area where Ohio, West Virginia, and Kentucky kind of all butt up to each other.
And I'm actually familiar with this area. My ex-in-laws, who are great people, actually live up in that area. And once I started researching, I was like, hey, wait, I know where this is. So I thought that was kind of unique. The case began on March 18th, 2006. A woman called 911 and said she had just killed her husband. She kept screaming and saying he was going to get up and kill her. She repeated this over and over again. She stayed on the phone 10 minutes until Lawrence County Deputy Van Kuren arrived. She was hysterical when police got there. Police locate a deceased man inside the home who had obviously been shot. The woman who called police was also inside the home when they got there and standing across from the man. She kept repeating to the officers who arrived that he was going to kill her. Deputies identified the deceased victim as 52-year-old Bill Goff. The woman who shot him, his 27-year-old wife, Megan Goff. So, police call the detectives, and Detective Aaron Bollinger arrives on the scene and speaks to Megan. Detective Aaron Bollinger talks to Megan before he actually enters the home and views the crime scene. He said Megan was upset when she first spoke to him. She tells the detective she shot him because she did not want him to hurt the kids. She said she had obtained a protection order, but Bill continued to call her. Bill told Megan he had found her and was going to kill her and the kids on Monday, March 20th, which was Megan's mother's birthday. He said Megan's mom was going to have a good gift for her birthday. Megan said she last spoke to Bill the previous night, March 17th, when he called her twice to try to persuade her to drop the domestic violence charges and come back home, and then he would not kill her and the kids. But Megan said she told Bill no. She told Detective Bollinger that Bill had been telling her for years he was going to kill her and the children. She said the second call on March 17th was at 9:30 p.m., and he said he wanted to meet her and the kids in person. Megan said she tried to get him to agree to meet with just her, but he said he could not do that. He needed to meet with all three at the same time. Bill told Megan he was off work on Monday and was going to find her. It didn't matter where she went because he could spend all day to find her and kill her. He said nobody had done anything to stop him. He had found her at the shelter she was at, and no one did anything. He had previously hurt their baby, and no one did anything. He was not going to pay child support because there would be no children to pay it to. Bill told Megan he did not care about the kids and he just wanted the house. He continued to tell her he needed to meet with all three of them, and she begged for it to just be her. And she told him she would even come to his house. Megan then told Detective Bollinger that she had come to Bill's house in hopes he would kill her, and then that way the police would get Bill and her kids would be safe. She said she had left her kids at her grandparents' house and drove their car to Megan's father's house, which happened to be next door to Bill. She parked the car in her father's carport and retrieved the 2 loaded guns she had in the car. She put one in each pocket and then walked to Bill's house. Megan said she had 2 guns because Bill always told her you need 2 guns because one might jam. And in police work, we have a saying, 2 is 1, 1 is none. So, I mean, that's a pretty accurate thing that someone would say that knows about guns. Megan said she thought she would get there before Bill got home from work, but he was already home when she got there. She said the reason she parked at her dad's house and walked to Bill's is because it would give her time to knock on the door before Bill was able to get a gun and shoot her. So she goes over, knocks on the front door. He opens it and said, "Hell, I can't believe you had the guts to come to the house. I didn't think you'd really do it." He told her to get inside, so she walked in and he shut the door. She said he stood in front of the door and said, "You know I'm going to kill you." He told her he knew the kids were with her grandparents and he would kill her and then go to the kids and kill them, and there was nothing she could do about it. She said this is when she took out one of the guns and held it at her side and told him to let her leave. He told her he was not going to let her out of there, and then he laughed at her and said, "You won't shoot me? You don't have the guts." Megan said this is when she lifted up the gun and shot him. But when she tried to pull the trigger the second time, it wouldn't shoot. So she pulled the other gun out of her left pocket, pulled the trigger, and kept pulling until it was empty. She said she wasn't sure what to do with the other gun that hadn't fired, so she pulled back the slide. Something came out, and then she was able to shoot it, so she kept shooting it until it stopped. She said she saw him lying on the floor and not sure if he was moving, and she was scared, so she put the guns on the piano bench and calls 911. She said she immediately called 911 because she was afraid he was going to get up and shoot her, and she knew she didn't have any more bullets. Detective Bollinger asked her if she saw him with a gun, and she said no, but he had something on the side of his pants, and she wasn't sure what it was. She also tells Detective Bollinger that Bill had told her if anyone ever attacked him, he would pretend to be dead and then grab them as they tried to step over him, and then he would kill the attacker. So Detective Bollinger goes in and looks at the crime scene, and then he has some other questions for Megan. In this follow-up, Megan tells Detective Bollinger when she first shot him, he was standing with his back to the door and had his hand on the doorknob. She said after she shot, he kind of held his arms up, so she wasn't sure where she hit, but thinks it was high because he did not go down. She said he then turned and stepped so he was facing the double windows, then turned into the corner of the room. She said she was standing close to the kitchen door and piano when she began to shoot him. She said she was trying to walk towards the door to leave when she started shooting the second gun. She thinks he fell to the ground after the first or second shot. After he fell to the ground, she remained standing in the same place and emptied both guns. She was afraid that he was playing dead. She tells Detective Bollinger that her intention that evening was to get him to either calm down and not hurt her babies or just hurt her so the police would get him. She knew he wasn't going to let her go and would kill her kids.
So we've heard about the crime, but how did we get here with Megan and Bill? Well, Megan's family was originally from Worthington, Ohio, but moved to Hamilton Township when she was 15, and their neighbor was Bill Goff. Megan said that she became friends with Bill and they began a sexual relationship when she was 17. That would have put him at about 42. 2 years later, in 1998, Megan graduated from high school and was 19 years old, and Megan and Bill were married. When Megan was 21, she gave birth to their first child, a baby girl, and a few years later, they had a son. So Jen already mentioned that in January of 2006, Megan had stated that Bill was wanting her to drop this domestic violence case against him. So what led up to that? Well, Megan had called deputies to report domestic violence perpetrated by her husband, Bill. Deputy Collins responded, and Megan recounted to him what had happened. Megan was frantic when Deputy Collins arrived. He knew she was concerned and frightened for herself and her kids. He could see that clearly by how she reacted. But she managed to calm herself down enough and told the deputy that he assaulted her and one of their children. Megan said that she and Bill had been sitting on the couch and the kids were playing. She had been videotaping the children playing when the violence started. The kids were playing, as kids do, and they were being loud. Bill was a little bit groggy and sleepy and became violent. He became angry and wanted the video camera Megan was holding, so he grabbed her in a way that she claimed made her fear for her safety. She claimed that he shook her violently and kicked the youngest child who had just had surgery. Megan also claimed that he threatened to kill her and the kids. She said that even after the incident, although she was still terrified, She drove Bill to the hospital for some ongoing treatment. She said she just wanted him out of the house so that she could notify police. Megan said that Bill told her he had a bomb in the garage and would blow up the house, but the responding deputies searched the home and didn't find any bombs, but found some firearms. They were there on a domestic violence complaint, so the deputies felt that the firearms needed to be secured, but they couldn't confiscate them, so it was agreed to give them to Megan's mother, Karen, to hold on to for safekeeping. When we say all of the firearms, it was a lot. 63 firearms. 50 of these firearms were locked in a safe that Megan had opened for the deputies. Megan was not comfortable with any firearms in the house, so she asked Deputy Collins to unload the weapons. And Bill was obviously a firearms enthusiast, but also an amateur gunsmith and gun collector, and that explains why he had such a large amount of firearms. Megan's mother, Karen, said that she would go to the hospital and pick Bill up from the treatment and arranged to help the deputies arrest him. Karen did this, and Bill was arrested. Bill was cooperative after his arrest, and he seemed shocked that he was being arrested. Megan took the children and went to a domestic violence shelter in Kentucky and began divorce proceedings shortly after this. While at this shelter, a shelter employee saw a man on the premises that resembled Bill, but the employee couldn't say for sure who it was, but it kind of sent the shelter into lockdown. Megan and the kids got scared and moved again, and they ended up in an apartment in West Virginia. So some details about the crime itself. Bill's obviously 25 years older than Megan at the time of the crime, and Bill had actually taught Megan to shoot. Megan claimed that the shoot was in self-defense, just like she had told the detective. She shot him 15 times in the head and chest with 2 of his own guns. She was 15 for 15. She did not miss a single round. Bill and Megan had been separated for about 60 days at the time of the shooting, and their children were aged 1 to 5 at the time of the crime, but were not present during the crime.
Even with Megan's self-defense claim, she's charged with murdering her husband. The trial was a 2-week bench trial, which means there was no jury. The case was heard only by a judge, and this judge determines guilty or not guilty. This is the right of the defendant to have a jury trial, or they can waive that right and have a non-jury trial, which is what Megan opted to do. And during that trial, we hear Megan's testimony, and we get to hear more about her relationship with Bill. She began the relationship with Bill when she was 17 and he was about 42. And she said when she was still living in her parents' home, he would tell her to leave the bathroom blinds open so he could watch her take a shower. She said they married when she was 19, and for the next 7 years of marriage until his death, she was abused. She said it started with him screaming in her face and shaking her before it eventually turned physical. She said he controlled her actions and refused to let her leave the home without him, and he got to where he would not let the kids play outside. Bill made Megan call him daddy, and he told her she was ugly and fat. She would have to get naked and stand in front of him while he would critique things about her body. She said he made her take cold showers before intercourse because he liked for her to be cold. And then he would make her lie on her back with her eyes closed, and she was not to move or touch him during sex. He would use a flashlight to examine her vagina and tell her how hideous it was to him. If she did not do what he told her to do, he would threaten her with a gun. Megan said she could usually say she was sorry or just shut up and be quiet, and it would make things better. But lately, everything was making him angry, and even when she was quiet, nothing seemed to work. She tried really hard to do exactly what he wanted and tried to do what would keep him calm, but again, nothing was working anymore. One time he had shoved her to the ground, held a gun to her head, and then asked her how high she thought the blood would go once he shot her. She said he slept with a gun on the bedside table at night and kept his hand on it all night. He told her he couldn't be responsible for his actions if she disturbed his sleep. She said by 2004, she was not allowed to go outside of the house for anything. And it gets even worse. She said when their daughter was about 2.5, he tortured and abused animals in front of her. She said he had mutilated cats. He pulled kittens out of a pregnant cat's stomach and smashed their heads. He had shot a bird, and he had ripped the top of a turtle shell in half. She said he would do this in front of their daughter to punish her or to make her obey him. She said Bill was just completely abusive and controlling and humiliated her. She said that Bill threatened to kill her and the children numerous times. And she had a recorded phone call with Bill after their separation. 2 weeks before the homicide, she had recorded this call, which lasted about 90 minutes. And Bill was aware she was recording this call. But during this recording, he did not threaten Megan. During the recording, Megan asked Bill if he was going to kill her, and he told Megan she had absolutely nothing to fear and that it was absurd. He would rather get in a box and live under a bridge than lay a hand on any of them. But Megan testified it was after the recording stopped that he threatened her. Megan also testified that Bill had been poisoning her with something that was causing unexplained medical conditions. And Megan's urologist testified that Megan had kidney stones that could be caused by an ingredient in antifreeze. But he also testified that Megan had the most common type of kidney stones, and it can be from any number of factors. Megan said the day of the crime, she had gone to the Olive Garden with her family to celebrate her mother's birthday, but she didn't tell any of her family about the phone calls and how upset she was. She also did not tell them of her plan to go to Bill's house that evening and instead told them she was going to meet up with some friends. Rachel Nance also testified, and this is Megan's cousin and best friend. Rachel said that 6 months before the January incident of domestic violence, Megan had seemed distant, but she never told Rachel about any domestic violence prior to that January. In November of 2005, Megan told Rachel that Bill had threatened if she ever left him, he would kill her, the kids, and himself. And then Megan's mom, Karen Gearhart, testified. She said that soon after they moved next door to Bill when Megan was a teenager, Megan began to have unexplained medical conditions that continued through her marriage to Bill. Karen said Bill had even poisoned some of her animals with antifreeze. She said one time he offered her a Mountain Dew, which he had never done, and on the way home, she got sick, and by the time she got to her house, she was violently ill. She thinks Bill had poisoned her. She said Megan called her on the morning of January 18th after that domestic incident, and Megan was crying. She told her mom that Bill had threatened to kill her and the kids. She told her mom that Bill came downstairs that morning because he had a doctor's appointment and Megan's grandmother was going to come watch the kids so Megan could take him. Megan said he was being harsh with the kids and actually shoved his daughter, who was around 5 years old at the time, and he did this 2 or 3 times. She told him if he was going to talk like that to the kids, he could go back upstairs, but he didn't go. She told him if he kept acting like that, she would get the camcorder out and record him so he could see how he was acting. But he started yelling at their daughter when Megan started recording, and he came after Megan. He was shaking her and bouncing her head off the couch and the wall behind the couch while trying to get the camcorder from her. Their youngest child, the toddler, was behind Bill trying to get to his mom, Megan, when Bill looked back, saw him, and back-kicked the toddler across the room. And he had kicked this baby in the stomach, which made him fly across the room, and that child was recovering from abdominal surgery at the time. Now, this was a little bit different story than what she told Deputy Collins when he responded to the home the day of the incident. Megan had told her mom the story of what happened and that he had previously threatened her, but now he was threatening the kids, so Karen told her daughter to call the police. Megan was hesitant to call the police, but eventually she did call to report the incident. Karen said she in turn drove to the Goff home, and a deputy was already there, and Megan was clearly upset. And after the deputies found those guns, she agreed to take them to her home for safekeeping. And then Megan went to a domestic violence shelter. And Megan told Karen she wanted to go to a shelter because she was fearful that Bill would find her if she stayed with relatives.
So it's pretty clear that Megan's defense is one of self-defense. Well, what does that mean exactly? That's not exactly as easy as just standing up and saying, I did it because they made me do it. As far as a self-defense goes, there's three elements of putting together a successful one. The first one is that the defendant is not at fault in creating the violent situation. The second is that the defendant has a legitimate belief of imminent danger of death or great bodily harm, and the only means of escape is use of force. And number three, the defendant did not violate any duty to retreat or avoid danger. So we'll start with element number 2 first. As part of self-defense, battered women syndrome is permitted to prove one element, the belief of imminent danger of death or great bodily harm. Battered women's syndrome, or as the CDC refers to it as intimate partner syndrome, is relevant when it's used to explain actions like long periods of physical abuse along with attempts to hide the abuse, delayed reporting of the abuse, or recantation of reports of abuse. To introduce battered women's syndrome, the defense has to show that the behavior of the defendant is consistent with the generally recognized symptoms of BWS and that this behavior provides a possible explanation for their behavior. And usually you got to get expert testimony to present this. Even with BWS, there are two other elements that have to be proven for an effective self-defense case. BWS alone does not prove self-defense. Dr. Miller, Megan's psychiatrist, said that she showed symptoms commonly seen in BWS. He said that BWS is not necessarily physical abuse, but can also manifest itself in psychological abuse, which was the case with Megan Goff. Dr. Miller felt that Megan had been the victim of psychological torture for about 7 years. So that's our expert witness who is testifying to that second element. Well, what about element number 1? The defendant is not at fault in creating a violent situation. Well, this one's a little more up for debate. Megan chose to go to Bill's home knowing that he was not expecting her there. She had no reason to be at his home, and it was solely her choice to be there. She also chose to arm herself when going to the home, knowing that his guns had been removed from the home in January. So a case could be made that she was responsible for creating the violent situation. And the third element is that the defendant did not violate any duty to retreat or avoid danger. And it's worth mentioning that this particular element of the law varies wildly from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and what happens here may not be the same as in your area. In Ohio, a person has no duty to retreat in his or her own home because they are considered to have already retreated as far as they can. There's no further retreat. And this kind of coincides with what's commonly referred to as stand your ground laws, where you can meet force with force if needed and kill an assailant with no duty to retreat. The court said this did not apply in Megan's case, that she had a duty to retreat. She had been living apart from Bill for 2 months and was not considered to be in her own home. And, as we've already discussed, instead of retreating, she actually went to Bill's home, which had been their marital home, but she didn't have the same right as Bill did to be in the home the night of the homicide, and therefore she was not able to prove the elements of self-defense.
So what about the state's witnesses? We learn even more information because the prosecution had a good bit of testimony and evidence that discredited most of what Megan had said on the stand. The day before Bill's murder, Megan had gone to her mother's house and retrieved 2 of Bill's guns. And at least a few hours prior to the murder, she had planned to show up at his house unannounced. And she gave different reasons for going to Bill's home. One reason was to talk him out of killing her and the kids. Another was just so he would kill her and the kids would be safe. And the third reason, just so she could scare him. Now, this woman who is terrified of this man, Megan, had purchased a gun for Bill as a Christmas gift just 2 years before the incident. Deputy Collins, who responded to the home for the January domestic incident, said Megan was frantic and fearful when he arrived, and this was several hours after the incident. And of course, Megan told him she had been videoing the kids when it happened and then took Bill to the hospital. Well, Megan came back from the hospital, and instead of calling the police, she did a video inventory of the home, and that was in a calm and collected manner. After that, she calls the police and is frantic. This video in question, where she was videoing when she was attacked, it was bouncing around, and the daughter could be heard saying, "Leave mommy alone," but there was really nothing more than that. And the prosecutor saw that video along with the video of her being calm before calling the police, and that's when they decided not to pursue those charges against Bill. Detective Bollinger, who responded the night of the shooting, said when he first spoke to Megan before entering the home, she was upset and making some sounds, but he saw no actual tears. That thing that she said she saw on the side of his pants and didn't recognize, it was a leather cell phone case that he had attached to his overalls, and it wasn't new. It's something Bill had had for a while that he carried. 2 employees from the domestic violence shelter where Megan and the children stayed said she did seem fearful, but one employee said she seemed rather erratic during her 8-day stay. And then we have Earl Schilling, a friend who lived close by, said he was shocked when he learned that Bill had been arrested for domestic violence. That just wasn't Bill. He said Megan was the boss in that house. Schilling said on March 17th, the day before the shooting, Bill called and said, "Hey, can I come over to your house and stay for a while?" So, of course, Schilling said, "Yes, you can," and Bill came over and parked his car in Schilling's garage. Bill explained to Schilling that Megan was wanting to meet him, but he didn't want to meet her because there was a protection order Megan had gotten. So he parked in the garage in case Megan drove by and she wouldn't be able to see his car and know he was at Schilling's house. Bill stayed there until about 10:30 p.m., and during that time, Megan called Bill twice. Now remember, Megan had told the deputies that night that Bill had called her twice the night before. Schilling said Bill didn't answer on the first call, but he did on the second call. And Schilling said he didn't hear the entire conversation, but the part he did hear, it didn't contain Bill making any threats. He said when Bill finished the call, he told Schilling that Megan was wanting to meet and had asked him to take the day off from work on Monday so they could meet. But he told her he wasn't going to take off from work, and Bill told Schilling Megan was disappointed that he was refusing to meet with her. Now remember, Megan had told them the day of the incident that Bill said he was taking Monday off from work to hunt her down. Bill continued to tell Schilling that Megan said she had been driving up and down the road to try to find Bill, and while they were on the phone, when Bill was at Schilling's house, Megan was actually sitting in his driveway. Bill was fearful enough that at 10:30, when he got ready to go home, he had Schilling drive him to his house to make sure Megan was not there. Then they drove back to Schilling's house and got Bill's car, and Bill went home. James Turner, a close family friend, said Megan was the dominant one in the relationship. He said after Bill's guns were taken away, he offered to let Bill have one of his guns so he would have some self-protection. But Bill refused. He said he would violate his protection order and he didn't need it. The testimony that was presented by the prosecution witnesses was consistent. Bill was an easygoing, even-keel kind of guy. He never seemed quick to anger. And it was Megan that was the dominant one in their relationship. The attorney Bill had hired for his divorce and domestic violence charge said he received a call from Bill on the afternoon of March 17th. And Bill asked his attorney if he could meet Megan since she was asking to meet with him. And Attorney Fisher, Bill's attorney, said, "No, do not meet with her until I can contact Megan's attorney." Then we have the testimony of Jesse and Mona Holcomb, who lived next door to Bill, and they had known them for quite some time. They both said they did not see any behavior that indicated Megan was afraid of Bill. They said they saw Bill outside playing with his children like any other father, and he and Megan seemed like a happy couple. They saw Megan leave the house many times by herself and without Bill. Mona said Megan pretty much came and went from the home as she pleased. But I want to give a few more details on those phone calls. On February 25th, so this was a little over a month after that domestic violence incident, and Megan gets the protection order and leaves. She files a report in Mason County, West Virginia, claiming that Bill called her phone, and it was her new number, and he should not have that number. But phone records show she called him at 10:57 a.m., lasting less than a minute, and he returned the call at 11:11 a.m., lasting 1 minute. Now, Megan denied making this call when she was brought to court and said that her daughter must have done it, and it showed up on Bill's caller ID, which allowed him to call her back. On March 4th, Megan again called Bill using a prepaid phone card, and this call lasted 86 minutes. And this was the phone conversation that she recorded and said once she stopped recording is when he threatened her. On March 17th, the day before his death, Megan said Bill had called her first. But phone records showed she called him at 4:01 p.m. and it lasted 7 minutes. Megan denied making this call. A state's witness said Bill was at work when this call came in for Megan, and Bill was running out of minutes, so he told Megan he would call her back. So he immediately called her back from his work phone, and that lasted 5 minutes. The witness said Bill was excited and happy that Megan was calling him, but he called his attorney and asked his attorney advice on meeting with Megan. So at 6:01 p.m. is when Bill calls Megan back from his work phone, and it lasted 33 minutes. This was after he talked to his attorney. But Megan had told Dr. Resnick that during this 33-minute call that Bill threatened to kill her and the kids on Monday, March 20th. But the state had 2 witnesses who Bill had listened in on this phone call with Megan. The 2 witnesses were co-workers, James Sunderland and Roger Lovett. Neither of them at any point during this entire conversation heard Bill threaten to kill her or the kids. Bill actually told Megan a couple of times that he loved her. He repeatedly told her, "I'm not going to meet you. I cannot meet you. I won't meet with you." And all of this because of the restraining order. He never said he would meet with her. Also on March 17th, she called his phone at 9:01 and 9:04 p.m., and this would have been when he was at the home of Earl Schilling. There were no calls between Bill and Megan on March 18th.
So you heard Jen mention Dr. Resnick, and Dr. Resnick was the state's psychiatric witness. He was unable to reach a conclusion with any degree of medical certainty if Megan actually suffered from battered women syndrome. Dr. Resnick said he was unable to tell if she was being truthful, and so he was unable to reach an opinion. He said the video from the incident on January 18th, where she inventoried the home, didn't show, in his opinion, her fearful of her husband or the situation. She took the video of the interior of the home after she went and drove him to the hospital for the medical treatment. But the video was made a few hours before she called police. And when she called the police about the domestic incident, remember, she was frantic and fearful, even though she had just completed this video where she seemed fine. He said Megan's story was inconsistent, and there was the issue of believability of Megan herself. Also, as is usually the case with these situations, there's only her version of events. And if you couple that with contradictory information that the state dug up, it casts doubt on her story. Megan claimed that she was fearful of her husband, but put herself in harm's way by going to his home. She was insistent to Dr. Resnick that Bill threatened her during the 6 p.m. call, but remember, he had the 2 witnesses that testified otherwise. She told Dr. Resnick that with the first 2 shots, her goal was to scare him and not to hit him, but all 15 shots actually did hit him, and hit him in vital areas, the head and upper chest. She told Dr. Resnick that when she walked onto the porch, she could hear the tumbling sound like him opening the safe, and she was in fear that he was retrieving a gun. And she never reported this to police, and it stemmed from a statement that she made about, as we mentioned before, her father lived next door to their home, and she claims that during this time she saw Bill take 2 rifles into the home. Now, this would have been after the police had confiscated all of his guns, but she claims that she saw him acquire 2 more guns and take them into the home, although she never mentions this to the police. She told the detective that she walked into Bill's home, but told Dr. Resnick that he grabbed her arm and pulled her into the house. She told police that she fired when he turned around, but told Resnick she fired while facing him as he was laughing in her face. She also reported to Dr. Resnick that after the first shot, Bill was walking towards her, and that's why she continued firing. And this, again, did not match the story that she gave the detective who responded. Dr. Resnick testified that Megan may have acted in anger when she shot Bill because the moment she fired, she said he was laughing at her and telling her she didn't have the guts to shoot him. So Megan was, in fact, found guilty of aggravated murder with premeditation, and she was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 30 years. At the sentencing hearing, the state said they didn't believe some of the things that she had said, especially about him torturing and killing kittens in front of the daughter. There was nothing to substantiate that. So Megan appealed her conviction, and in fact, Dr. Resnick, who was his psychiatric testimony that allowed the grounds for appeal because he had testified to her motive and state of mind. She was granted another trial, and at her second trial in 2010, she had a jury trial this time. She was convicted again, but this time they found no premeditation, so her sentence was 15 years to life, plus 3 mandatory years for the use of a firearm in commission of a felony. This trial was again appealed to the Ohio Supreme Court, where she was denied a new trial. In 2018, she filed for clemency based on the battered women syndrome defense, which had failed her in trial and again failed her. They said that she embellished elements on her clemency statement. She will be eligible for parole in 2025.
So this case, it's kind of all over the place. I want to point out a few things. The deputy, when he arrived and was removing the guns in the home on January 18th, he said Megan was scared of guns and she had him unloaded. But now when she goes to Bill's home, she's carrying the 2 guns. She shoots him and she's scared. 15 shots and all 15 hit him. Those things to me do not seem consistent. To be fearful of guns, but have enough knowledge about them to be able to hit all 15 shots.
Yeah, the whole situation has problems.
That January domestic violence incident, she told different stories of why she was recording. She said, oh, well, I was recording the kids playing, and that's when he became violent. She tells her mom, Bill was acting like a turd, so I got the video camera to show him he was acting like a turd. I'm wondering, because it seems like all along Megan is trying to get Bill to violate that protection order. She's trying to get him to meet. She's saying he's calling her, but she's calling him. I'm wondering if there wasn't some reason she got that camera to record to try to make Bill, to try to push him to act in a way to make him look bad, because maybe she already knew she was going to leave him and divorce her, and she was trying to set him up for failure, per se.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of thing does happen a lot, but it certainly didn't work in this instance because it doesn't sound like his behavior was all that inappropriate on the tape. Obviously, with the prosecution choosing not to keep pressing the DV case.
Yeah, I just had that thought that maybe she had another motive than what she stated. And also, we talked about that incident. She takes him to the hospital, then she videos the home. And a few hours after the incident, she calls deputies and she's frantic then. I think that goes to show Megan's character of her manipulation. She was a manipulative person because she was definitely trying to manipulate that situation and manipulate the deputy.
That's why it's important for law enforcement officers responding to this type of situation to remain as neutral and as objective as possible. so that they don't fall victim to this kind of manipulation. Now, the deputy has no way of knowing that this frantic, can barely control herself woman out of fear a few minutes earlier was calmly recording a video of the contents of the home, because she's not going to show him that. And her behavior at the scene, one could argue that it's a way to, I guess, win the deputy to her side.
That's exactly, because you see that, and you see people do that. Another thing is that recorded phone call that she made, where she asked Bill if he was going to hurt her or the kids, and he's like, no, I would never do that. But then she stops recording, and he makes the statements threatening to kill her. Why do you stop recording before the call is over? I don't know that there was ever any answer for that, but to me, that says right off the bat, I mean, you're recording for 80-some minutes, and you decide to stop recording, and then he makes threats?
Yeah, it just doesn't hold water. She either did record the whole call and then edited some of it out, or made this whole thing up, because there is no valid reason, especially when you're afraid that someone's going to threaten your life or anything like that. There is no valid reason to stop recording.
And I don't want to get into the battered women syndrome too much, because, I mean, that's a very touchy topic. But battered women syndrome, they can have behavior that's peculiar. You do not typically see women who are trying to contact their abuser like she was. He was not calling her. She was the one that was calling him. And she was the one going to his house. It was all her actions. And people say she wore the pants in the family, essentially. And I don't want to say she wasn't a battered woman. That very well, there could have been abuse going on in that home. But I think all along, it looks like Megan, I mean, I can't say that I don't disagree with premeditation. Normally, I'm devil's advocate on this, but it looks like all along she is trying to do something that is not exactly above board.
Well, yeah, and it's like you said, battered women syndrome is certainly a real phenomenon and not something that we would ever try to discredit. And I think there's also a valid case to be made that sometimes women who suffer from battered women syndrome, it's not something that they can employ as an effective defense. I think we're talking about two different things. When we talk about battered women syndrome, we see this circle of violence, right, where the aggressor in the situation is violent and then apologizes, and they make up and they go through a period of happiness, and then it happens again. And we see this circle of violence in domestic family cases, and that's sometimes referred to as battered women syndrome. You know, this desire to keep coming back or giving him a second chance, or even outright fighting or, hindering the police when they come to arrest them. And that's not what we saw in this situation. I think that's a separate thing from using battered women syndrome as a defense to homicide, which is, as we've talked about in other cases, is the taking of a human life by another human. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's criminal intent. Homicide is just one person taking another person's life. But for battered women syndrome to be your defense to killing this person, it has to meet those elements that we talked about. And she could have very well been a battered wife who then developed a plan to premeditated murder her husband. And therefore, I mean, I guess she is the bigger of the two evils, if that were to be the case. And it's like you said, we saw evidence. All the evidence we saw presented painted him in a very different picture. And I don't know, just like you mentioned before, we don't know if she was a battered wife or not. And I certainly wouldn't discredit that. But when you look at this situation by itself, she wasn't in a situation where she immediately had to kill him out of fear of him fixing to kill her. And I think that's fairly obvious by how the thing was set up.
Well, yeah, because she was fearful, yet she went to the home to talk him out of it. And she had said in the past that she would just shut up and he would calm down. So if she's going to the home to talk to him, that seems like she knows it's going to escalate a situation if we're relying on what Megan has said.
Well, and then you look at the fact that she took 2 guns, and sometimes maybe we wouldn't see that as super relevant, except she claimed that the guns were only to scare him. But she knew enough to know that if she has 2 guns and one jams, then she has another one. And if her goal is to only scare him, I mean, how many guns do you need? To me, this says that she is anticipating a confrontation of some type. And she is anticipating a confrontation that she may not be able to resolve with one handgun. And there are certainly cases that facilitate that. As a police officer, we often carry 2 guns. Like you mentioned earlier, the 2 is 1, 1 is none.
Or sometimes 3 or 4 guns.
Right. The 2 is 1, 1 is none kind of thing. But if you think about on a police officer's job, they're not necessarily looking for trouble, but they realize that they are putting themselves directly in trouble's path just by nature of their job. And I don't feel like it's any different for her. She knew that going to his house and confronting him one way or the other was likely to lead to confrontation. And she brought 2 guns in case she needed them.
Yeah. And now this is my opinion, solely Jen's opinion. So y'all can get mad at me, I guess, for my opinion if you want. I think all along Megan was trying to get Bill to meet with her so that she could claim he violated the protection order and was coming after her so she could kill him, because she knew they were getting divorced. She was going to lose her house. She was not going to have money because he worked and he had good money, and she didn't want that to happen. And part of that could be that she was battered and was angry about the abuse she suffered and had not done anything about it. But I think all along she was trying to get him to meet her so she could say, he came after me, I killed him in self-defense. And when Bill's like, I'm not going to meet you, I don't trust what you're doing, you're trying to get me to violate my protection order. So she had no other alternative than to go to his house.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll play devil's advocate this time, because only a little bit. Now, I'm not sure that that's so much the case. I say liked, that's kind of a bad way to put it, but I tend to agree with the prosecutor's theory that was it the state psychiatrist who proposed the theory that maybe his response to her angered her into taking that kind of action. I don't know that she went over there with a plan to kill him. She might have gone over there to spark a confrontation, something that she could capture on a recording to get him to violate and get him locked up. But the motive here, as far as, him being the primary breadwinner for the family or her not getting the house, I think that's a little weaker motive than we see in other cases, because I doubt she collects his life insurance if she successfully self-defense. If she kills him in self-defense, his life insurance policy doesn't pay her as the beneficiary. I'd almost guarantee it.
Oh, well, but we don't know that. And I didn't even think of that. That could be another reason. She's thinking, I kill him, I get the house, I get his money.
Yeah, but I would say that that's all. I would be real surprised. It would be interesting if somebody out there in True Crime Out Loud listener land knows the answer to that, because I don't know anything about insurance underwriting, but I would be extremely surprised and a little scared if your insurance policy will pay when your wife kills you in self-defense. Just being honest. So
I don't mean to laugh, but you're right about that. I see where you're
now. She may be entitled to like his estate as far as the house. If she kills him in self-defense and they find her not guilty and everything, then their marital assets probably become hers. She don't get no life insurance payout. There's no way. I just don't believe that. So I think it's a whole lot simpler than that. I think she went over there to spark a confrontation, probably something that would get him arrested and not look favorable in their divorce proceedings, maybe in the area of alimony or child support. There's a lot of things that can affect those numbers. All right. And if she portrays him in a manner that gains her an advantage in a divorce proceeding, or gets him locked up, or so. We see that all the time.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And that's something that, which technically, if you get caught enticing somebody into violating a PFA, then you yourself can be charged with violating
Because you're violating
the PFA.
it, yeah.
And I think that's something that people don't realize a lot, even when it's not for a nefarious reason. The makeup attempts, right? We get a PFA against each other, and then we decide we want to give it another try.
People may not know what you mean by PFA.
Well, PFA is short for Protection from Abuse Order. And it's
Or a restraining order.
It's a temporary restraining order, usually until we can have a court proceeding to figure out what we're going to do. Get a divorce, make it up, try again, whatever. But the problem with a PFA is that a lot of times both sides will try to entice the other side into violating it. So I don't know. I just don't think that it was a dead set plan. I think she went over there anticipating trouble, not really knowing what was going to happen. I think she may have even brandished the gun, and he scoffed at it and said, "Hey, I'm fixing to shut the door and going inside because you're not going to do any of this anyway." And he was wrong.
Well, and you can also be wrong, because I still think that there was premeditation to it, because I think all along she was, for whatever reason, she was trying to entice him to violate that restraining order. She's calling him, and maybe it's because she's upset. Well, hey, he's not even chasing after me or trying to get me back. He's not calling me. Whatever the reason, I mean, I think there still shows some element of premeditation. Going over there with the guns, parking at her dad's house, parking where he can't see the car, walking up there, trying to surprise him. I don't know. I think the original trial judge was right, in my opinion.
Sure. And it very well could be. It very well could be if it was premeditated, like we often see in cases. It was a sloppy plan. But we hope you enjoyed this week's case, and as always, we'll see you next week. We would like to hear your thoughts on this and all of our cases, and as always, you can reach us by email at truecrimeoutloud@gmail.com, Facebook and Instagram at True Crime Out Loud. Out Loud is 2 words, not one, and Twitter at TC Out Loud.
Photos, links, and sources for this case can be found on our website at www.truecrimeoutloud.com.